Ashley. Welcome to Darling Cottage Diary. I'm very excited to be sharing an art journal page featuring La Belle au Bois Dormant, which is the original French fairy tale of Sleeping Beauty by Charles Perrault. Now, if before you click away, if you are somebody who doesn't like Sleeping Beauty because he kisses her while she's asleep, that is the Grimm version that a company who shall not be named picked up and used in their 1950s animated film. That does not happen in the French film. So I am going to recount the French version because there are several differences and I quite prefer the French version. Big surprise. I already did a similar video on La Belle et la Bête, the French Beauty and the Beast, which was originally written by Gabriel de Villeneuve in the 17th century, and was realized on screen in the 1940s by Jacques Cousteau. We will leave that one because I'm going to be revisiting La Belle et la Bête later this month. Ephemera Society, my Patreon community, I gave them 3 French fairy tales because that's the themes that I am in the mood to create for them and their ephemera parcels this month. And big surprise, all these ladies who love paper chose La Belle et la Bête, Beauty and the Beast. But Sleeping Beauty and Cendrillon, Cinderella, were the other options, and I love those stories equally as much. So, and again, they are all quite different from the more modern versions that we know, because more of the modern versions were based on the Grimm's Brothers versions written in the 1800s. And they're quite, we'll say the French versions, the original French versions, were more sophisticated, more chivalrous, more, I like them so much more. So we start our story with this king and queen who have difficulty conceiving, and they finally do conceive of a daughter. Her name is not Aurore. We never know her name. She is just la princesse, the princess. And the coronation, or the christening, 7 fairies are invited from the realm, and they arrive on dragons. And those are the only dragons that are in the original fairy tale. So they fly in on their fancy dragons, and they're pets, not foes, which, again, I like that better. So dragons are our friends. And the king is very excited they're all there. He's very flattered, so he creates, he has commissioned these étuis, these solid gold drawers that have le couvert, the forks and spoons, like all of the things that the utensils you use whenever you're eating. He had these commissioned very specially for these magical beings to thank them for coming to his daughter's coronation. And he knows that they're going to bestow gifts on the child, and he's just trying to show reverence to them. He did not realize that there was one really old fairy who was still alive. Like, they didn't even know she had been living in a tower unbeknownst to everybody, and she shows up. He doesn't have an étui for her, and he feels bad about it, but she acts like she's not irritated, but under her breath at dinner, she says a curse, and the smallest of the good fairies hears it, so she hides behind the tapestry so that when the other fairies are bestowing their gifts upon La Princesse, which are very similar to the more modern tale of beauty and song and dance and gracious manners and gracious taste. She's just like the epitome of of these things. And the old fairy casts her curse that everybody knows, right? Of she will prick her finger on a spindle of a spinning wheel and pass away. So after the old fairy leaves and everybody is in tears and aghast, the tiniest fairy comes out from behind the tapestry, and she says, no, she's not. That's not going to happen. She's going to sleep for 100 years. So the 100 years is built into this promise, this gift. It's just it'll be 100 years, and then a prince who is worthy of her will find her, revive her, and she will live a happy life after that. And so, of course, her parents are distraught because they know they're not going to live 100 years to see their daughter again. But they're very concerned that she would wake up in this desolate old castle with no one to take care of her, no one to... They're worried that this is going to come to pass, and she would be alone and not have anyone to like cook for her as soon as she wakes up and everything. So she also extends this spell that everybody in the castle will fall asleep to, and the mother and the father, the king and queen, they're going to have to leave because they have the country to, they are very dutiful people. They're going to continue ruling the country. They can't sleep 100 years because they want their daughter to wake up to a country to rule. And so they have all of this arranged. And all of the spindles and spinning wheels get destroyed. And the distaffs too. They try to get rid of everything to do with spinning in the country, which, if you know anything about making fabric, would have been extremely difficult because fabric was already expensive. I can imagine that created some very serious economic problems for them, but it's not mentioned in the fairy tale. I just read fairy tales and think of practicalities. But so we have happy 16 years where they get to spend with their daughter, and they're on a vacation or not a vacation, they're like traveling, and at one of the houses they're staying at, the princess finds a tower, climbs it, and there's an old lady sitting up there spinning, and the princess wants to learn how, and so she goes over. She's very curious, very polite, and she's wanting to learn how. And once she starts to try to spin, she immediately pricks her finger on the distaff and falls into her sleep. And so the old lady feels really bad because she didn't know, she didn't destroy hers. She didn't know of the prophecy because she lived in such a remote location. Nobody told her that this happened. They didn't have the internet at this time period. And so, the king and queen obviously are understanding. They're like, this was a prophecy. This is going to happen. Like, it's not your fault. And that was, they remove her to their castle. They put her in the most beautifully decorated room, beautifully decorated dress, so that she wakes up in comfort. And then the fairies also, the good fairies, they know as soon as this happens. So they rush to the king and queen's side, make sure that everything is set for the 100-year sleep, put everybody else to sleep, and as they're leaving, they create this bramble forest, this very, very thick bramble forest to protect her and protect the castle and everybody in it. 100 years goes by, and there are people who have stories, there's monsters in the castle, and there's ghosts in the castle, and all of this stuff. And but there's, a group of young men, princes, who are hunting nearby, and they're all sharing stories that they've heard. And the one guy is like, well, I heard there's a princess up there. And of course, we have the chivalrous one who's like, oh, there's a princess. Oh, I'm gonna go check that out. And so he's curious, and as he's starting to approach the woods, he kind of has a little hard time getting in there, but then as he passes through, the branches actually move out of the way for him and his horse. And so it's like the forest is magical in a way. It's not trying to keep him out. It knows that he is the right guy for her to marry, and he's the right guy for her. And so it's just opening up and then closing behind him so no one can follow him. So he climbs the tower, he finds the princess in this beautiful room. He's dumbstruck because she is gorgeous, and even though she's like sleeping, he can tell that she's very graceful and amenable. Anyway, so he's also just confused because everybody is asleep, but he knows they're not dead because they're breathing, and he even talks about like the cheeks of the baker are flesh from his work, and so he understands that something magical has been going on. And as he approaches the bed to look closer at her, and he kind of kneels by it just to try to see if she is breathing, she wakes up. There is no kiss, there's nothing like that. There's no physical contact made at all. And she just opens her eyes and says, "It's you." And it's suggested in the story that she's been having good dreams. The good fairy bestowed upon her good dreams of the prince, presumably, over the last 100 years. So she already knows that this is the guy that was meant for her. And they sit there and talk for hours and just get to know each other. And it's very sweet and very chivalrous and very romantic. And 4 hours later, her sister comes in and is like, "I'm hungry. Can we go eat now? Can y'all like settle down and go, can we go eat?" And so they go and attend everybody, and they get to know each other over, he kind of leaves and comes back from his own kingdom over a long time. But before he stays with her for a while, and they get married. But then he comes and goes for about 2 years. They have 2 kids together, and his dad is a little on the, it says that he's simple, so whatever that would have meant at that time period. And he doesn't want to like upset his dad's routines or throw a wrench in whatever maybe he had been planning for him. So he keeps it on the down low. And his mom is an ogress, which is important later, but he knows that she is kind of a vicious person, and he just doesn't want them to know about it. And so he goes and he spends as much time as he can with his wife and kids, and then his father passes away 2 years later, and then all of a sudden he's king, he's in charge. His mom can't tell him what to do, and because she becomes queen regent, so he brings his wife and family to his kingdom, and they have both of their kingdoms together. They're ruling, and they live happily for a short time. But having children around, the ogress mother decides that she misses the taste of human flesh, having kids run around, which is dark. But it is also, I think it's interesting because Charles Perrault was, I think, what we would call a part-time artist in today's world. He had a normal day job where he worked for the builder of Versailles, Colbert, and helped create the beautiful labyrinth gardens, and had all of these rendered all of these artistic creations of statues based on Aesop's fables. You can learn all about this in his biography, or his memoirs, sorry. And so he had this very kind of demanding day job almost. He himself did not marry until he was in his early 40s. He had a very, very, very happy 7 years with his wife. They had 4 kids together, and she passed away suddenly of smallpox. And he never married again. And he, in several letters and everything else, he's a very staunch defender of like the female gender. Because he's in l'Académie Française, and some of these guys were not very kind to the female disposition. And he had several published stuff of like being very facetious against a lot of them. And he just seemed like he seems like the kind of chivalrous men that he put in his fairy tales. And I imagine being at the court a lot, he saw the court games play out, because all of the movers and shakers in the story are female. You only have the king, who really only has like 3 sentences about him, and the prince. And the prince just wants to make all the women in his life happy. But I'm sure he saw a lot of the court comings and goings. The men would have been on and off, leaving for war, leaving for projects, leaving for all kinds of stuff, and a lot of the court games would have been happening between the women. And that is my own understanding of maybe why he wrote it that way, of having this very vicious woman pitted against this very kind one in the stories. And anyway, so my own ponderings aside, the story itself continues that as soon as the king leaves for war, they have a war with a neighboring country, and so he's gone for a summer. And the queen regent, his mom, kind of takes over and sends the wife, La Princesse, and her daughter, Aurora. This is who Aurora is her daughter. And they named their son after the day. So we have the dawn and the day, le jour. And that's their son's name. Sends them away to a country house because she figures, well, it'll be easier to off them and eat them if they're far away from court and, you know, the protections that are there. So she does this, and le maître, like I guess the maître d', le maître of the house, I guess maybe the butler in English, says, you know, she tells him to go bring her the girl, Aurora, cooked a certain way. And he can't do it, obviously. Very kind of similar to the huntsman in Snow White. And so he brings her a baby goat and served with a really good, like, Robert sauce. And then she said that, you know, the next day or the next week, whatever, she wants the boy. He brings her a baby sheep. And then she wants to eat the princess, who is an adult by now. You know, she's an adult, obviously. But she wants to eat her now so that she can, I don't know what she plans to do when her son comes back, because I would feel like her son would take revenge on her killing his family. But she's not thinking about that. And anyway, so he takes a doe and prepares it, you know, as tenderly as he can, and feeds her that, and then hides the family with his wife in their own little cottage that's far away from that country house. And everything is okay for a little while, and they're able to get away with the ruse for a little while. But then the ogress queen is walking in the forest and hears the kids fighting and playing, realizes she's been lied to, erects it, like takes them back to court. She's so angry, she's not thinking about any kind of long-term consequences of what's going to happen now that she's going to execute them in full public view. She erects a massive pit and fills it with vipers and crocodiles and all of these terrible creatures, and tries to walk them off the plank into this pit. And of course the butler and his wife are included because they are the ones who lied to her. And which is very similar to, if you know anything about Viking history, Ragnar Lothbrok was killed. But so she tries to walk them off into this pit of doom, and just in time the king comes back and is like, "What are you doing, Mom? What are you doing?" And she is in such a fit of rage that all of her plans have been foiled, that she throws herself in the pit of doom. And he didn't even have to do, like, he's just confused about the whole thing that he's ridden up on. She throws herself in, and then, you know, of course he unties his wife and kids and butler, and they all go back to the palace and live happily, you know, just live a happy normal life after that. And the morality I found really interesting, because Charles Perrault wrote the moralities at the end of all of his tales because children were his main audience, unlike the previous fairy tales that had been written by a lot of people. They were mostly women, actually. They were for adults, but so he wanted his morals to be clear to the children reading them. And this one basically says it's okay to wait for the right person, and it's no less enjoyable even though matrimony may be deferred. And he also made it explicit that he would never want to preach this moral specifically to women, because he knows that that's something that, you know, women were already expected to be married and everything else. And he was just very kind in how he wrote even the morality of the tale. So the page that I created, I wanted it to have this background of a castle that may have been asleep, very devoid of color, and then have bits and pieces of it that may have been, you know, on the walls in her room of the brighter wallpaper and some of the wording behind it. And then, of course, the brambles that open up specifically for the prince to come find her, I wanted those to be a part of it. And then she herself is behind this very beautiful ornate frame, sort of a gilded cage that she's in, guarded by time, and the hourglass and the key. And then, you know, I also wanted the prince to be facing her and she be kind of facing the castle, because she is asleep. She may know who he is because of the fairies, but I wanted him to be actively looking for her. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you've ever heard this version, please tell me in the comments because I'm very curious. And if you have another, if you're more of a Cinderella person or another fairy tale person, drop that in the comments as well so that I can start thinking about others. I hope you enjoyed this. If you're new, I post videos every Sunday. And if you're interested in more of my handmade work, you can look at my Patreon or my shop at darlingcottagediary.com. I hope to see you next week. Thank you for being here, friends. Bye.